Obviously, we have a small number of sponsors for our YouTube channel, and my goal is to keep that number small because we want to recommend what we see as the best of the best dog products to you guys. What I like about PupBox is that they effectively help you train your dog all year round.
They'll send you a training-themed box every month. Training-themed. I cannot emphasize that enough.
Yeah, we're talking about legitimate training advice, so these training cards come in every box. It's incredibly packed with information on things you should be working on that particular month with your dog.
They've put years and years into figuring out the training needs of dogs at certain ages.
Can PupBox tell me how to get her to stop biting me right now? Literally every month you get motivation in a box that helps you keep up with your dog's training, because let's face it, we all know consistency is the name of the game. That's way easier said than done. When you get a box in the mail that says, hey, here's what to work on, here's the supplies, here's the toys, here's the treats that you need, that kind of has a way of getting you to work with your dog a lot more. So you can get half off when you use our special link.
Just go to pupbox.com/Zach and use discount code Zach.
And we appreciate it when you support our sponsors. It helps us make more and better videos. This is an ultra-sensitive topic that affects everyone in our community. I especially want to be respectful to people who train differently than I do throughout this video. I want to challenge us all, myself included, to feel a little bit uncomfortable in this conversation. I really, deep down, feel like this is a discussion worth having. We need to have it now. As a dog trainer, I am deeply concerned about the future of our industry, given what I'm seeing on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. My hope and expectations with this video is that if I outline my concerns and I show what my current understanding of the data is, that maybe I can be shown where I've miscalculated or where I'm looking at this all wrong. I seriously mean this. I genuinely want this to be a good faith discussion. And I'm going to be presenting some questions throughout this video that I have a genuine interest in hearing your response to. I want to make sure that we all feel free to discuss this topic openly and in a way that is honest and without judgment on anyone. So today we're going to go over aversive dog training methods. Definitions are very important in discussions like this. Thank you. A type of behavior therapy designed to make patients give up an undesirable habit by causing them to associate it with an unpleasant effect. There is a wide spectrum of using aversives in dog training. It can be as simple as saying, nope, you can't have that treat. Or on the more extreme end, practically as we see it in dog training sometimes, it can be a more heavy-handed approach with a choke chain or a prong collar and swift, harsh corrections being delivered at optimal moments. The purpose of aversives are to discourage future behavior by creating something unpleasant that a dog will associate with that thing in their mind. We also really need to talk about the difference between balance training and compulsion training, whether or not we should incorporate punishments for more extreme behaviors like aggression. We're going to examine why punishments are still used in dog training today, and most importantly, and this will be the theme of the video, whether it's necessary to use aversive methods, and if so, when and what is the scientific data to back that claim up. And this is a really passionate topic for dog trainers because it really centers around what should we be telling the public about how to train their dog at home. Dog trainers watching this, we're all dog trainers. We all got into this because we love dogs. At no point am I ever questioning your love and dedication to making dogs' lives better. I know that we all come at it from that perspective. But we can still have a discussion on how to make each other better, right? And I'm hoping that you can help make me better. The question I have is it ever necessary to use punishment, particularly physical punishment, as part of a behavior modification or training plan, even with extreme cases like aggressive behavior? And if so, what is the scientific data to support that claim? Throughout this video, we're going to provide you with our perspective and the data that we think supports that perspective. But I do want to remind everyone that when we're having discussions like this, the burden of proof lies on the party that's making the claim. In this case, it would be dog trainers who are saying that sometimes aversive methods are necessary. I mean, from where I sit, to be honest with you guys, I think we are in a dog training renaissance at the moment. I mean, dogs are learning to talk with buttons right now. With every innovative study that we see about this topic, it's like, oh, wow, dogs are even smarter than most of us guessed before. So in general, dog behavior science is relatively new, but we're finally starting to see a lot of data come in recent years. Right now, there is what can only be described as a major disconnect with how the scientific community looks at animal behavior and dog behavior, and what dog trainers are teaching the public about dog behavior. And so the general public has a certain perception of how dogs should be trained. Broadly speaking, I think we agree there's a couple of ways that people attempt to train their dogs. They'll use treats to let them know when they've done something right, and they might use corrections or punishments to communicate to the dog, you've done something that I don't like. And to be clear, dog trainers refer to corrections like this, even subtle ones, like taking a treat away from a dog when you're encouraging them to sit and they don't do it. We refer to those things as punishments, things that are viewed as unpleasant to the dog. And as we discussed before, wide variance in the use of various types of punishment in dog training. I do want to be clear that all punishments are not equally impactful on a dog. Saying you can't have a piece of chicken to a dog probably isn't viewed as aversive to a dog as using an electric collar in a situation that causes them discomfort. A lot of people, if not most people, are going to use a combination of rewards and punishments in their training. Virtually all dog trainers agree that rewards are fantastic and productive for dog training, regardless of their disciplines. In other words, positive reinforcement dog training amongst virtually all dog trainers is the equivalent of green vegetables are good for you. In learning theory, the principles that govern how all animals learn, punishments and aversion are actually never required. There is no known instance in the animal kingdom where using physical punishment is required to create new behavior or to stop unwanted behavior. And so if one is making the claim that sometimes tools like choke chains, prong collars, and electric collars are necessary to deliver aversion to a dog to discourage future behavior, then they would be responsible for uncovering new science. Now look, that is not the same as saying that aversion isn't sometimes necessary in a dog's life. The question to me really centers around the intentional use of aversives. But let me give you an example. Let's say I have two dogs in my company, they're getting into a fight and I have to break up a fight. I may have to break up the fight by grabbing them and separating the dogs in a very assertive way that the dogs could view as unpleasant, but it's necessary in that moment. That's not what I'm talking about. But never would a dog trainer, I hope not anyway, assume, oh, that's how I train a dog not to fight. And I'm not saying they do say that. I'm trying to explain that it really comes down to using intentional aversives as part of a behavior modification plan to get a dog to behave as we wish them to be, or as a training program. Is that distinction clear? If a dog fight breaks out, I got to break up the dog fight by virtually any means necessary. Do I think that that is a wise training approach to resolve the aggressive issue long term? No, I do not. What responsible trainers do, whether they use aversives or not in their dog training, is they take a step back, they develop a plan of how to address this issue. Ideally, that plan should be a medium to long-term goal because it's a complex issue, and give their client the appropriate advice about how to systematically desensitize, how to counter condition, and how to get that dog on the path. This actually isn't even controversial, but virtually all behavior science where physical punishment is used virtually always concludes that there are long-term welfare concerns. Even though, scientifically speaking, there is no known instance where aversive methods are required, we still see punishments implemented frequently throughout the dog training community to resolve deeply complex issues. Now, two of the studies in dog training that are often referenced were both done in 2017, and they're both comprehensive reviews, studies of studies, so to speak. And the purpose of these studies was to try to get an overall consensus as to really how your dogs at home should be trained and advised by professional dog trainers. But the results of both of these compilations of studies suggest that aversive methods are correlated with stress behaviors, elevated cortisol levels, and this is an important one, fear and aggression within dogs. Now, one of these studies reviewed 17 different scientific papers that compared reward-based training methods to training methods that incorporated punishment. There were 5 surveys that compared a variety of different training methods. And they found that people who incorporate aversive techniques in their training are more likely to report fear and aggression or behavior problems. Those surveys were met with skepticism by some, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The review also looked at 3 other studies that directly observed dogs, and those studies also found that using aversive methods might likely affect canine welfare and negatively impact behavior. Researchers also attempted to look at dog-to-dog aggression by including a questionnaire study that found that dogs who were trained using aversive techniques were more likely to be the perpetrator in dog-to-dog interactions. Now, in the case of this study, this included some people using more extreme types of punishments, like hitting them or shaking them, which most modern dog trainers, balanced or positive alike, don't agree with. The study also took a look at the efficacy of bark collars, shock collars, and electric fences. Results suggest that using those tools might be painful or frightening to some dogs, as well as having negative effects between a dog and their handler, their overall welfare, and their training performance. This study of studies also concluded that reward-based methods don't carry with them the same long-term welfare concerns and might actually be more effective. But the question isn't, is it more effective to use one method or the other? The question is it necessary to use aversives in dog training today? I have zero desire to cherry-pick data that supports my perspective. Instead, my perspective is informed by the scientific data that I'm aware of. Criticisms of these studies are certainly valid, but it's not about any one study in and of itself. Rather, it's the body of science that should inform our opinion. Obviously, further research is always needed in all aspects of science. With people who don't necessarily agree or like the findings of these studies, one thing that I've noticed is that some will be quick to toss out the validity of the studies because, for example, they included a lot of survey studies. Now, you might remember in a recent video, we actually talked about what went into a proper survey study. It isn't as though it's just some people sitting in a room who come up with some random questions. A good survey study has been shown to deliver accurate data and weed out the noise. Sometimes people like to think that it's better to have a trained professional come in and observe a pet dog if that's what's being studied, because they're going to know what to look for and the right data to gather. But if you think about that, there are some issues with that approach as well. How many different contexts can a trained professional evaluate a dog in a short period of time? What if the dog is having an off day? What if being observed in and of itself causes the dog to behave differently? So in many cases, guardians giving information about their own dogs is the most accurate way to gather necessary information, depending on what's being studied, of course. The people who typically know their dogs best are the guardians of those pets, and if we can ask the questions in a way that regular people can answer, and we found a scientific way to weed out much of the noise, that can be a wealth of data as it relates to dog behavior. So it's not necessarily valid to say, oh, survey studies, too much room for error. You didn't invent that. The scientists thought of that already. These studies are published in scientific, peer-reviewed journals. I say that to let you know that they have undergone and conformed to the scientific method to the best of our ability. What about since 2017? I mean, that was 5 years ago. Well, more and more findings keep coming out. Studies done in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022 today continue to support that aversive approaches in dog training have with them long-term welfare concerns. And I will tell you this right now on the record. If we start getting a large body of science that starts to come in that suggests that these physical corrections that I'm skeptical of right now are necessary, or that they contribute to a dog's long-term well-being, or that they're more effective, then I will do a 180 on this like that. And again, I'm not trying to be difficult on this at all right now, but to suggest that aversives are necessary as part of a behavior modification plan or a training plan is at odds with what science tells us. Being on the other side of science on this issue is a scary place to be when we're in a scientific profession. This is a complex issue amongst dog trainers, so there's more to cover. Let's continue. If you're with me so far, I can hear many of you saying, Zach, that's great, positive reinforcement is fine, but it's not appropriate for all dogs in all situations. Some dogs need those physical corrections, particularly those who have issues of aggressive behavior. For example, if a dog is so scared of humans, they might lash out and bite them. And so maybe it becomes easier to justify the use of these tools because a dog biting humans ends badly for a dog. Aggression, in huge part, in dog training does stem from fear and anxiety. There are many known ways to address fear and anxiety that do not involve the use of aversive punishments. This is not controversial in the field of animal behavior. To the contrary, it's well established. Keep in mind, though, that aggressive behavior can also stem from instinct, fear, stress, hormonal changes, social dynamics, genetics, and environmental factors, of course. It is shown time and time again throughout the animal kingdom, including dogs and humans, that punishing aggressive behavior as a strategy to eliminate it long-term is not only unnecessary, but extremely likely to be counterproductive. What is the scientific data on dog aggression? One 2017 study showed successful rehabilitation of dogs who had resource guarding issues. And for that, they used clicker training alone, which is generally considered to be exclusively positive reinforcing. Now, the sample size was very small on this study, but the results were still clear, at least with these dogs. Every single dog in the study showed improvement, and aversive punishment was not used at any point in the study. So there's a study that shows you that, at least in this case, it was not necessary to use aversion to get the dogs to stop guarding resources. Another recent 2022 study surveyed people in the UK who were seeking help with their dogs and hired canine professionals. Some of them were positive, some of them may use mixed methods, but the bottom line is, even though aggression was the #1 reason people were likely to hire one of these trainers, they didn't perceive any difference between those who used more aversive methods versus those who used methods that did not include aversions. So bottom line is that they were perceived as equally effective to people seeking out dog training in the UK. So even here, where we see aversives, okay, yeah, they're just as good as positive reinforcement, they work. But here's the thing though, if all things are equal, why would we add punishment if it's not necessary? So again, none of these studies are showing us where using aversive methods are necessary. This is a great study. Also, a 2021 study really examined how dogs behave in a veterinary setting. Dogs are probably more likely to behave aggressively in that setting where pain is sometimes unavoidable. They're getting shots. Maybe they need to be restrained for one reason or another. They used positive reinforcement and time and patience. They were able to correlate a reduction in aggressive behaviors. And they did that by using easy managing techniques and positive reinforcement. Another 21 study looked into the effectiveness of various techniques for the treatment of canine aggression and found that positive methods tended to be the most consistent beneficial technique, even in the case of aggressive behavior. This isn't even new. B.F. Skinner, the person who coined the quadrants, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, understood that punishment wasn't ideal and noticed considerable side effects. B.F. Skinner himself noticed that punishment could lead to increased aggression, decreased motivation, lower self-esteem, and even decreased compliance when using these physical punishments in his experiments. The case to use a lot of these controversial methods in dog training is that there are 4 quadrants. We should use all of them. But this probably isn't the optimal interpretation of the 4 quadrants. Which brings us to our next section. Let's talk about balanced training. I hate labels, especially as they relate to other humans and dogs. But there are a couple of labels that we can't deny are pretty relevant to this situation. Broadly speaking, there are 2 main types of dog trainers. There are those trainers who do not intentionally use aversives as part of their behavior modification or training plan. And then there are those trainers who will consider the use of using one of the 3 tools we've talked about, choke chains, prong collars, electric collars, or some other potentially aversive method as part of their approach if they deem it necessary for that particular dog. So the first type of trainer we talked about is generally considered force-free. That doesn't mean, though, that force-free trainers never use aversives. They're just not ever part of a formal training plan for a dog. But in general, the goal is to not have to rely on aversives at all and design a training plan that takes that into account. And then, of course, the second type is the type of trainer who will keep on the table and consider the use of aversive methods when training dogs. Trainers like this are often considered balanced dog trainers. The term balanced is supposed to refer to Skinner's 4 quadrants and how they should all be considered and used when training a dog. And it sounds so sensible, especially since it's drawn 4 equal parts. So they'll use positive reinforcement. Sometimes they'll use punishment, negative or positive punishment. We can get into all of that another time. They may consider the use of choke prong or electric collars at some point in their training. And if we're all being honest, all of those tools are specifically engineered to be aversive to dogs when used as directed. Some people will take me to task on that, and I don't understand. If I am wrong about that, please tell me why that's not the case. So amongst trainers who call themselves balanced, the spectrum is quite wide. There are trainers who will just, default from day one to using tools on dogs like choke prong electric collars. There are other trainers who will use it once every 2 years. The thing that the trainers have in common is that they refer to themselves as balanced. However, within the balanced dog training community, you have the two sets of what many of us would call compulsion trainers over here, and then those who are going to use tools far more reluctantly over here, balanced dog trainers. This is why dog training methods are highly confusing to the public, it would seem. So compulsion trainers are typically those really heavy-handed dog trainers that you'll see, very common on social media. You'll often see them just very early on in the training process put one of the tools we've talked about earlier on the dog and just more or less default to that. It's not like on the 3rd, 4th, 5th lesson with these guys. And very often, they'll get these dogs to submit like that. We need to discuss why that is highly problematic. And truthfully, most positive and balanced dog trainers, we're all kind of seeing the same thing, that compulsion trainers definitely refer to themselves as balanced a huge number of the time, and there's a lot of compulsion under the umbrella of so-called balanced training, and there's a divide in the ethics there. I feel like the term balanced has been so tarnished. I mean, really, if you're using positive reinforcement 98% of the time, you're practically there. Maybe kick the ladder out. See if you can do it without the tools, because I think you can. And I think you can do it more often than you think you can. Do you know where I think the disconnect lies? Like, really, if I could just pinpoint and put my finger on the issue. It's this. As we established earlier, science is telling us that all behaviors can be modified or trained without the use of aversives. So far, we've found no exceptions to that with any animal, humans included. And I think that's why we get so emotional about this issue sometimes. Our peers and our friends in dog training often are telling us that actually there are exceptions to learning theory in dog training, but the science doesn't support that. If I've missed something, bring it to my attention, because I just want to be a better dog trainer. So the observation we continue to make is that the more someone approaches this craft in good faith, makes an effort to learn what collectively we all know, the less likely they are to use aversives in their training. And there's evidence to support this. If you're a certified dog trainer, you're less likely to use punishments in your training. Is it that aversives are sometimes necessary, even though that's inconsistent with scientific theory? Or is it that at some point in the training process, we as dog trainers encounter something that becomes challenging to us, and we resort to using punishment because we don't know what to do next? That is okay. I've been there many times, so I would not cast judgment on any dog trainer in that situation. One thing I like to do is to research the topic in more depth, talk to trainers that I really trust on the matter. So I'm not shaming anyone who doesn't know what to do in challenging situations. I want to get at even a deeper question here. In spite of what we know scientifically, why are aversives in dog training as a whole still so common? We are all a product of our system. No, what I'm saying is we're all a product of our system. So if our environment is encouraging us to behave a certain way in relation to dogs, we're more likely to do that. And then you know how environmental culture goes. I mean, it's a mess. I mean, it's very multifaceted. So with the mounting welfare concerns that we're seeing in the scientific community, why is there still such a disconnect between what science is telling us and what's being practiced in the field? Now we're getting into like what I see as the real stuff here. One 2018 study looked at this very question and tried to actually identify some of these barriers that were preventing people from updating their dog training knowledge. Dr. Zazie Todd wrote this study to try to illustrate the wide range of factors that might influence people's use or non-use of humane dog training methods. There's a lot of things at play here, including a person's personality, their individual beliefs, their education, and their knowledge of dog training, their awareness of professional bodies' position statements in their industry, perceived social pressure from their family and friends and peers. The situation is compounded by the lack of certification standards for dog trainers and the widespread availability of poor quality as well as high-quality dog training advice, plus the promotion of aversive training techniques by local trainers as well as celebrity trainers. Because there's a divide amongst us dog trainers in terms of training philosophies, the public is left with this idea that there is not consensus with how we should approach dog training, even though there actually is a scientific consensus. Dr. Todd also pointed out that dog training is a skilled activity. People might give up on positive reinforcement if they don't feel like they're making enough progress, and that causes discouragement. It seems that one of the things we've got to overcome is people trusting their instincts to train their dog. I can understand that, right? Not everyone's going to be like, oh, let me go brush up on the latest science of dog training because I got a new puppy. I get it. There was a really interesting survey study in Italy that asked people where they got their dog training information from, right? And 55% of people listed myself as their main source. I'm not even going to criticize that. How many things do I do in my day-to-day life that I don't get a professional I don't have a personal trainer and I try to work out? That's probably a bad idea. So out of that 55% who answered myself, what are the numbers? 42% said that their education was influenced by the internet, TV, or a book. I think everyone can agree that there's a ton of misinformation as it relates to training dogs in the public eye. And 13% said that they got their dog training knowledge instinctively. Sometimes our instincts aren't as good as science. That's all I'm saying. In 2017, there was a study that looked at popular dog training books in the US, UK, and New Zealand. It found a wide variety of training techniques recommended, from straight up positive reinforcement in some cases to the extremes of how hard a dog should be hit. And plus there was demonstrably untrue information as well as metaphysical information in these books. Again, with all of this inconsistent information, it's easy to see why the public remains confused. I don't think any professional dog trainer wants to be presenting outdated information to their customers, to the public, or anything, and I don't think any of them intentionally do so. An article in Society and Animals looked at how dogs are viewed in dog training culture in Finland. This was interesting. And so this study found a difference between what they call dog-centered and human-centered dog training approaches. So if you were a dog-centered trainer, that meant that you approached dog training as more of an equal partnership, where you shared power. You allow the dog to make mistakes with the aim of reinforcing when they do what you like and then build from there. So in contrast to that, human-centered dog trainers viewed the relationship not so much as a partnership, but more hierarchical. So this discrepancy of viewing the training relationship as more of a partnership or more of a one-sided relationship seems to really be at the root of this divide around the world. I'm speaking very broadly here, and there will be exceptions to this. Many trainers who implement aversives in their training expect a dog to obey a command immediately. And if the dog doesn't comply, then they're either punished until they do the behavior, or the handler may physically assist them in making the behavior happen in some way. And so dogs who are being trained with positive reinforcement are encouraged to try things on their own. Since we want them to think for themselves, mistakes just aren't punished. So when you look at both of these approaches, look how the power dynamic is distributed. In one case, you have a partnership, and in another case, you have, I'm a human, the dog is here to serve me type attitude. A positive reinforcement approach actually gives some power to the dog as they brainstorm, and mistakes are tolerated, and then successes are rewarded. It's very powerful. A 2017 study pointed out that positive reinforcement training does demand more from a trainer, though. That's because you have to really pay a lot of attention to a dog's body language and how they're behaving in a certain context, their emotional state, and what it really takes to set up that individual dog to succeed. I can see how that's perceived as a barrier because, I mean, there is a little more knowledge required to kind of manage those situations. It's not as basic as, you know, you don't listen, I'm going to make you listen. Or, and again, not saying all trainers who use aversives train that way necessarily. Stay focused. I think we all agree that every professional dog trainer needs to take agency in their craft and in the dogs that they work with. I don't think that we can deny the cultural impacts that bleed into dog training, how it is representative of how society views certain roles. And that might be affecting people's adoption of using positive reinforcement-based methods in their training. I think we would be wise to be aware of cultural systemic issues that affect our profession as well. We're not done yet. Remember, the focus of this video is, when is it ever necessary to use aversives as part of a behavior modification or training plan with dogs? In some areas, studies are slim, especially as it relates to dogs. We actually have a strong precedent of how punishment affects human behavior in our culture already, and that is well studied. We also have the understanding that mammals of all kinds have been shown to learn and process emotions in similar ways. In light of that, the position statement of the American Psychological Association on corporal punishment in children is pretty clear. Scientific evidence demonstrates that physical discipline of children by parents and other caregivers can harm children's mental health and possibly increase their propensity toward aggressive behavior. Research indicates that physical discipline is not effective in achieving a parent's long-term goals of decreasing aggressive and defiant behavior in children, or of promoting regulated and socially competent behavior in children. The research on the adverse outcomes associated with physical discipline indicates that any perceived short-term benefits of physical discipline do not outweigh the detriments of this form of discipline. Now, I mean, take it, I understand that's talking about humans. The parallels are pretty striking. One study found 10 negative outcomes for corporal punishment in children, but one benefit. One benefit was immediate compliance. Isn't this what we often see when aversives are used in training? Immediate compliance. We'll see a wild and crazy dog immediately stop doing something after some firm corrections, and that can be highly persuasive to the public. They just want a well-behaved dog, and they want one as soon as possible. But you know what else we're seeing is the likelihood of up to 10 other potential outcomes as a result of that compulsion. The negative outcomes of punishment in children included aggression, reduced mental health, increased criminal or antisocial behavior, and a reduced quality of relationship with the parents. I don't think it's totally wrong to draw this parallel at all, because of how closely dogs and people actually are. People like to point out how different they are, and they are very different. We are a completely different species. But I will remind you that learning theory doesn't just apply to one animal at a time or one kind of animal. It applies to all animals, humans and dogs included. These are very similar to the dog training results that we talked about earlier. I mean, some of us might remember a time when corporal punishment in schools and at home was a hotly debated topic in society. But these days, and tell me if you agree with this, we've seen a dramatic shift to positive reinforcement in parenting culture. And that's because we understand that it's been shown to be more effective, and that those side effects are very real and not worth the risks. Okay, if we are collectively able to acknowledge that there's no known instance where physical aversion is necessary in order to modify behavior or teach new behavior in humans or any other animal, what justification do we as professionals have making it part of a regular training regimen? That is the question. Even if you think that the science is way too flawed in the dog field, way too flawed in learning theory, the burden of proof to support your case lies with the person making the claim. In this case, the person who says that aversives are necessary sometimes in dog training. And if one feels that way, they must then show the scientific data that supports that hypothesis. And I'm not trying to be nitpicky here, but remember, dog training, by its very nature, is a scientific profession. We are the ones trusted with getting living beings to behave differently than they do right now. I'm dying to get your feedback on this as a professional trainer. I'm really curious to see what your perspective is. I encourage you guys to follow us on social. We have freedom to get into these topics even more so sometimes on TikTok and Instagram. If you got a new puppy, get them a pup box. Use my special link to get half off, pupbox.com/Zach. I'll have that and the coupon code in the description below. So we're working on lots of exciting things still behind the scenes. Thanks for being patient with us, and we'll see you guys in the next video.